Good morning, good evening, everyone. This is Abhinav Agarwal. I am your host for today. And welcome to the Indic Book Club Open House with Otis. And we have been doing this now for more than half a year. And for those of you who are regular attendees to this open house, you know how this goes. But for the benefit of those who are joining or will end up watching this on YouTube, so we invite people to submit their short writing samples to Otis for review, for critique, for feedback, and we prescribe a format for people to send it in, which is send it as a PDF document, Times New Roman, font size 12, double spaced, and keep it between 750 to 800 words is a suggested limit. Anything more, substantially more than that, and chances our Otis won't be able to go through it. So he reviews it, sends you his marked up feedback, and then on Sunday in the session he will go over the piece in the specific points as well as some of the general feedback on writing. So do keep those pieces coming in, and we do this at 8:30 p.m. India time. But from next week we will do this a half hour earlier. That is, we will start at 8 p.m. so we can finish by either 9 or 9:30 p.m. depending on the number of pieces that have been submitted. And with that, Otis, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we pieces. So that gives us a little more time to, and we're not going to use more time than we need. So we might be a little bit early, but I thought that we could do it. We have Abhinav piece and a piece. So maybe we could have maybe a bit more of a discussion with the author about their intent. We can, look at the pieces pretty carefully. I'll start with your piece. It's here. I'll share my screen. Okay, so Abhinav, you do to share.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Otis? I missed the last part.
So you need to allow my sharing. So right. To share. It's probably an update from Zoom that they make that the default.
I can never figure this thing out. Give me just 1 second. Pin, make host, change role, remove, allow. Okay. This is weird. Okay.
Abhinav, try making him co-host.
Okay, you should be able to share now.
Okay. I have it.
Perfect.
Maybe us a little bit about this piece that you're thinking. I just developing it. It goes further. We did not read. It's not complete here, I don't think.
It's not. So this started off as I still don't know what it started off as. There's an echo.
Let me mute myself.
So yeah, that's the echo still there. Okay. Yeah, good. So I don't know why what started this piece, but I think I had this thought in my mind. I wanted to try my hand at something different. So the initial thought was, let's try something that is more in the line of, say, a horror genre. And as I started writing that, I came to a logical point where I wanted to stop what could be considered a first chapter or a first section. And I deliberately left it a little ambiguous in the sense, if you look at the last paragraph, I've not taken it in any particular direction one way or the other, but I wanted to essentially the one intent was that if these are the first lines, first paragraph, first chapter of a book, if it ever, becomes one, is this something that would hold a reader's attention? Would they want to know what happens next? And does it check, most of the boxes on what are the rules of good writing? So that was essentially the entire purpose. I do want to take this forward, but I will need to think about what the story needs to develop into.
Okay, am I back on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I've lost something, one of my scenes, so I'm using the mute on my, bear with me, the technology. So as we go back and forth, so we don't have that echo. Great. I was maybe Abhinav, we can put you on. Maybe you could read the first page, and then does that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So why he picked that dog out of the dozen choices at the shelter, he never knew then or later or ever. Nonetheless, despite its scrawny build and tawny color, a mongrel appearance that looked thrice removed from any pedigree, and no more than a year old, he selected her. Yes, it was her. Ignoring a disapproving look and a mild shake of the head from the supervisor who prepared the paperwork, he brought her home. That was the start of his troubles. She would not stop peeing on the floor. No matter how many times he placed newspapers and took her there, she would not pee on the newspapers. A minute later, he would hear the trickle of piss pattering on the floor, and there would be a small puddle not 3 feet from the newspapers. Then there were the small cutlet-sized droppings. He would take her outside to the veranda, to the small patch of green and brown that passed for a garden, to the narrow cemented path where he parked his car, but none appealed to her excretory senses. Only the Italian marble tiled floor in his living room did. Every single time when she did that and he came to inspect the shit show, she would have that guilty look on her face, not quite looking at him or the puddle. The face would be puckered into a look he couldn't decipher, the ears drawn back, and those eyes. Damn those eyes. They half looked at him in an apologetic, accusing, I know what is coming way. Try as he did, the dog would not learn. On the 5th day, he took the leash and attached it to the dog's collar and walked her to the car. There, he unlocked it, opened the rear door, and waited for the dog to get in. When she hesitated, he lifted her by its shoulders and hauled it in. There she lay, curled up on the back seat, its face flat on the edge of the seat, ears pinched back, looking far out. He got in the driver's seat and turned back to look at her. He was glad he hadn't given her a name.
Great, thanks for that. You know what? There were things that I thought about this piece. I didn't know that it was necessarily, I think you said, Abhinav, that it was going to be in the horror genre. So I'm aware of that, that would be something that I probably would be aware of, like Christine or something like that, when you get something in King, that whatever is turning up is going to have, something more is going to happen. So as I was reading, I didn't dog is anything more than a dog. It was my impressions were basically that I definitely developing a protagonist and antagonist relationship. But I had this feeling when I read it yesterday that I saw the antagonist on the page, but I did not have a sense of the protagonist. So, and it's the protagonist that the reader attaches to. It's their struggle that we attach to. We see that they're the ones that are going to go. I think I noted to you, this is sort of a concept I developed quite a while ago, that we don't really have characters and plots. Okay, so it's not like I'm going to grab this plot. Character has their plot, and every plot has their character. I mean, like the character needs this story. This guy needs to have the event story transpire in order to bring him on his to arrive at enlightenment, or at least I actually see it. It's not that the character finally is enlightened or not. They may either. The choice, they're given the choice of some control over their destiny, essentially, at the end of the story. And
Correct. I don't know, who the antagonist might turn out, because right now, if you look at it, just the first couple of pages, there are only two characters, and only one of them is human. So to be honest, I have absolutely no clue what direction this might end up taking. And I'm not sure if that's a very good thing to start something out and not know where it can go.
I use writing definitely for my discovery. So I write into things all the time. I don't know. I have different projects that it's a little bit different. Do I pre-think sometimes and determine or jot some things on paper? Yeah, I mean, in a way, I mean, I have stories in which I've really thought about them. There was a story I wrote in a fairly short amount of time, the first draft in about a week, probably. But I think about the story for over a year in my head. It was in the back burner of my brain, and then I finally, it came to a head, and I wrote it down.
So I had one or two questions towards the last paragraph, I think, where you have made a couple of notes, comments with respect to, I think, I couldn't quite make out. I think you said something like I think this is repeating or something like that.
Well, let me go on my little jag first
Sure.
on the first page. So just to give you a sense of so when I end, because your first is it going to engage the reader? This is always our first question. And so the issues of engagement of the reader are that it seems to me that we have conflict. The conflict is necessary because we want the reader to wonder what's going to happen. We only can wonder what's going to happen if there's these forces, wonder who's going to win. Okay. The end of the story, as I've sort of suggested before, doesn't end up with one side winning over the other. If one side wins over the other at the end, that means it was unequal in the beginning. That means we don't really care about what's going to happen. We want an equal struggle at the beginning to inspire the question, what's going to happen? That's the first thing that has to occur. The second thing that has to occur is basically, I'm going to say, we care. So the two things, there needs to be a conflict. And then the second one is the reader cares. That's basically it. Two things. There can be a conflict, but if I don't care, it doesn't matter, right? If I don't care, I care what happens at the end. I don't care who wins. It matters to me, so I don't read on, basically. So we really want to concentrate on establishing those things. As I read it, the reason I said that I perceive of the antagonist is that I see that there's two people here, right? We have this he, we don't know his name, right? We have the he and we have the dog. I perceive of the dog because the dog is shit, hissing, et cetera, et cetera. So the dog is engaged in some actions. I don't really understand, this is the point to make. So the antagonistic is in a sense, the antagonistic force is the plot, but I don't know who the protagonist is. I don't know why he feels like he wants to get a dog. He's not really a present person. And so what I have is, if I have a battle of antagonists and protagonists, I want to keep my hands straight. I have a dog on one hand, so I don't tend to empathize too much with a dog. And I'm also not being called upon to empathize with the dog. It's the antagonist. It's non-human, as you say. But the protagonist is also a bit non. See, so I don't have a reason to care about the protagonist. So as I read the story about his struggle with the dog, I don't find that I care because I don't really know him. I don't know the person who I empathize with. I don't know the interiority. I don't know that character's struggle. And that's how I would sometimes term it. It's like, so you want to put the conflict onto the page. And I would just actually following, if you're new to this, follow this kind of formula. Put the two of them in the first sentence. But follow that first sentence with some interiority about what the characters struggle with, so that we can I should send you a link and maybe you can post it. You can post it as an addition to this conversation.
Sure.
So there's a story by ZZ Packer, and I've taught for years first page of her story, and I've taught specifically the first paragraph of her story. The first paragraph of her story is a textbook, a master class in how to write this first paragraph.
I'd love to take a look at it.
Yeah, I'll send you a link, because if I send you my PDF, that might be a copyright issue. I steal everything. I make PDFs, them in my files. So
what's the book's name again, Otis?
That particular study is ZZ Packer, called Drinking Coffee Elsewhere, and I'm pretty sure Aditi knows it. Yeah, so it was published in the New Yorker. The whole story is a textbook. You talk about the A story and the B story. All this stuff that I seem to be up off my head, I'm really deriving it from reading some works that are just so good. And ZZ Packer's work is one of them. It has deformed the way I think about stories and stories, no doubt. Perfect. But that first paragraph is a but what was interesting, Abhinav, in reading, when you were reading piece, there was, piece actually had a lot of voice. So when we, why he picked that dog out of the dozen choices at the shelter, never knew then or later, or nonetheless, despite its scrawny bill, scrawny color, the mongrel appearance that looked thrice removed from degree, right? So language here in the beginning has a lot of voice. So this is, I hope, will be as mind-blowing to you as it is to me. Whose voice is it? So we have a character, right, who's represented as a he, but we have this arch, voice that's, sort of coming down from above, right? So now, what does that do to my ability to identify with the character? That voice is really the narrator's voice. So the narrator's voice is sort of this arch voice that's above. It's not in the point of view of the character. And when we have that third person, the he, case she, when we have that third person, our point of view can still be anywhere. But here the point of view is up with this voice that also has a personality. When that voice, it could be completely objective and not have all of this, draw attention to itself as a voice, but it could be sort of unbiased and basically trying background itself. That's usually the choice. The narrator backs them in order to forefront the protagonist.
Correct.
If for all of you who are here, if you understand what I just said, you are doing great. Okay, so because it's very abstract, right? Ways to talk about, but we're talking really read something, it's our consciousness. So when we have an unbiased narrator who's simply objective, that personality, and what comes forward is the personality of the protagonist, because that's who we're framing in the struggle. There are some other forms, usually essay forms. So fiction would tend to forefront the character in the story. Let's say in this case, the he, that third person, an I, right? It can be an I, but it's a character who's physical, who's in the story. Fiction to forefront them. Essays, when we say, I woke up this morning again thinking about that day on Nantucket when I drove off the bridge. Okay, I'm doing this voice of Ted Kennedy, if you don't know. So when I say I woke up this morning, that's the narrator forefronting the narrator, right? It's the narrator who's involved in the story. That's in the essay form. So in this story, when I have the voice of this narrator being sort of pushed forward, but the character is in the background, I don't know who I'm aligning with. I don't know what the issue is. I'll go back to the essay. I woke up this morning thinking again about tragic stances on Nantucket summer. Okay, so I have forefronted the conflict, me and my memory, that conflict. So that's very clear. I am, when I write it like that, I am the protagonist, the narrator is the protagonist. In this case, we have this first paragraph seems to forefront the narrator, but I know what their conflict is. It would be okay to have them forefronted, pushed forward. Instead, I get these characters who are backgrounded, the he and the dog, and I don't connect to them. This is a very, this is a profound conversation about what happens in terms of our interaction with stories. So I really appreciate the level that we're able to discuss it here. The writing in this story is, it is extremely clear. You can see, like, I marked the times that I read. So 3:25 to 3:35. I read through this whole thing with ease in 10 minutes. I'm going to encourage all of you.
So that's what it is. I suspected that was the time, 3:25 to 3:35, but I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, I just jotted down so I can keep track of, keep track of my time. So that is good. This is variable. Okay, so let's put it this way. I don't have characters that I care about, but I'm able to read it clearly. You can't mask. If you don't have characters you care about, please don't mask it by writing something that's, obtuse and difficult to get through. Don't add to the difficulty, right? I mean, I'm a really believer in this. I wrote a story, one of my first stories. And I do believe in this, I mean, it starts bad and it gets worse, basically. I don't try to trick you ever. I mean, the first sentence is maybe the worst sentence of the piece. I mean, if you want to read it, you'll continue. If you don't, you did not waste your time. We want to honor our time always. we want to honor the fact that they're making choices. So we never want to trick the reader. So I would just say that, you know, there's nothing that's going to make up for not getting that character on the page, but it's still very readable. I mean, I've read it in 10 minutes. I didn't get everything I wanted in terms of what's going to happen or attachment to character, but it also cost me, you know, I didn't have to read a whole novel not to get it. I didn't suffer through figuring out what was going on not to get it. It was 10 minutes. I know this might sound strange, but I mean, it's really, that's great. You know, it's like, it's great writing. I was able to go through it very quickly. I wanted to point out too that I felt that so this is very heavy in the beginning. So I'll go here, the voice is heavy. We get into the action, the antagonist. There's only so much. So, oh no, I'll just do one thing at a time. You know, we talk about it's piss and it's shit. So yes, so here, if I don't want to read about a dog pissing and shitting, so this is my story, Abanov, then I will turn it away, right? So you might as, you know, there are others who are just not going to be interested in going there. I want to reference another story that you can attach to this. It's by Ehud Havazalet. It's in Manhattan. And it has to be the Gurov, Gurov in Manhattan. I know Aditi will be, it was printed in Tri-Quarterly. He was a professor here that my partner studied with. It basically has to be the gold standard of stories about a dog. There's two great stories about a dog. One is called Lady Cat Dog, like the pinnacle of storytelling by Chekhov. And then the main character in Lady with a Pet Dog, Gurov. Here we have Ehud Havazalet's story, Gurov in Manhattan. So he's obviously referencing the greatest dog story ever written. We can just go ahead and give that to Chekhov, greatest dog story ever. And he's writing Gurov in Manhattan, so he's obviously taking on a lot by doing that. The level of that as a man and dog is where it's a tremendous story. So in regard to a story that has very little actual plot, it is a master class in how to do it. Actually, I don't know if Cecile is here, or someone asked me yesterday about a good example of a story that has not much front story and a lot of backstory, and how to do it. This is something about writers. We understand that's a problem. We understand it's difficult. We not mind problems. We want to solve problems. One thing we do not do is we do not call it not a problem. That to emphasize. I mean, that would be such a mistake. We're like, well, you know what? My story is just that I don't need a plot and I can just have a lot of backstory. No, we don't do that. We say, this is a problem. How do I fix it? This is what makes writing a tour de force. Gurov in Manhattan is a tour de force because it takes on this very problem. And in fact, taking on these problems are the exact way to inspire us. Any given writer is not capable of tour de force. We do anything. We're actually hopeful. We can't do anything. We're able to do it because of this ability to say, I see what the difficulty is here. It's the difficulty that creates the tour de force, if that makes sense. It's not us. It's the difficulty. So maybe we can link that also to this conversation. Gurov in Manhattan, ZZ story. They are master classes. Honestly, just so good. Just to compare every time, so every single time is general. We're getting into the nitty gritty. Every single time she did that and he came to inspect the shit show. So that's a generalized time. It as engaging. This is something for us to recognize when we write something that's general, or when we write group, when we write the crowd, every day, always, anything like that, where we generalize time, we generalize number. It's less engaging because we as beings, it seems to me, are less able to perceive it. We actually live with a great deal of specificity. So, and I just want to bring up the point in juxtaposition, this versus this paragraph, and the reason I checked it. On the fifth day, we've now gone into an exactment place. He took the leash and attached it to the dog's collar and walked her to the car. That sentence is, my point of view, the best sentence so far that I've read, because specificity of time and place and character action. Those three things make it a stronger sentence. And so it actually, in reading, what I get mostly in the beginning is voice, because that's that thing that's dominant, not the details. In this paragraph, suddenly I'm the details of time, place, and character action. Those are the three hallmarks of scene, basically. So we've entered into an actual scene, walked to her car. There he unlocked it, opened the rear door, and waited for the dog to get in. It's still actually a summary, but it's a summary. It's not generalized. It's just time. We're dealing with every single action. We are summarized basically in real time and with real art characters. And then the same is true of this paragraph. There she laid up on the back seat, its face flat on the seat, ears pinched back. We could even have that more in, like, I would probably think of he, whatever his name is. Names are great because everyone does have them. His rear view mirror looked at her on the back, right? I would think of that because now we have a point of view through him to see the dog. He turned around on the seat, lay his arm on the passenger seat, said, "Come on, it's not so bad." So that continues in the scene in point of view. So again, we're on a very high level, but I would think about, if I could, I would want to do these couple of things. I would really try to isolate, and I think it can be helpful when we're developing a piece to really try to isolate ourselves, who the protagonist is, what is going to be the dramatized force of antagonism. And I say dramatized force of antagonism because the forces of antagonism are the entire world. It's the individual versus the world, but we dramatize it through specific actors, right? The dog, perhaps, Captain, Magneto, or, Dr. Evil, or whoever it is, but we use them as representatives of the entire world that does not do what the protagonist wants, but we personify that force in something so that we can dramatize the conflict, right? That's his drama. Okay, so that's my discussion on our first pretty, I want to try and, Abhinav, I want to find
Thank you, Otis. And the feedback was, I mean, the points you raised are amazing as usual. But I think some of the things that you said, I think can and will apply to most of the writing that I do.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. Thank you.
Sure, Abhinav. I wanted to also address whatever question you had about something I wrote later, but maybe we'll look at that later. But
sure.
The thing for us, I mean, the thing that's important to me actually in my development as a writer is when I stopped. It was not easy, but stopped saying like, hey, I want to tell people this. And then I said, instead, I have this problem of the reader. I have this problem of the reader who has free will. This is really infuriating to me. What can I do to make this reader who has free will to either read my work or not? How can I make them read it? That changed my life. Honestly, it changed my life. Because then I'm like, who are they? And you know who they are? They're just like me. They're just like me when I'm the reader. So there was no difference between them. I thought it was me who was going to write this thing, and they were going to lovingly read it because they were so happy that I was informing them, you know, and telling them these things. Not true. It turned out that my reader is just like me, and we want very simple things. Now we have to do it. Like once we see that as being true, we have the problem of doing it, and it's not easy. It's not easy to conceptualize the protagonistic force as a full human, complex human being. That's not easy. It's not easy to identify and develop the antagonistic force. It's easy to develop the drama between that. It's not easy to get the reader to care by probing into the characters' aesthetic abilities and their humanity and their struggle. None of that is easy. In fact, it's so very difficult.
Yeah.
Partially because we don't access the place where we can actually find that very much. We don't have any place to learn that other than actually really deeply at ourselves. We don't have anywhere to find it. So we have to look at ourselves. Very, very difficult work. This is well on its way. This piece, because it's so well written and actually so well organized, and you basically have identified forces of protagonism and antagonism, it's on its way to developing that. The hard work is to come in a sense, but you know, the question is, who is this guy? You know, why, going back to that, why does he need this story? Big question. That's a big question. Anyway, I applaud you. It's full writing. I really enjoying it, sentence by sentence. Full. It has. We've talked about before about the the siren song of voice. You know.
Absolutely, and it's now. You know, you have hammered the lesson of the voice and point of view so many times when writing anything and everything. Those are among the first two things that come to the mind. Where, what's a voice? Am I mixing up points of view?
The way the phrase that I've sort of given myself to try and work on my style is that the writing, a clear pane glass through which you see a world. That's the thing that's informed me. There's another thing that goes along with it. So there's a phrase, you must murder your darlings. This is a popular, you know, like show don't, okay. You're going to hear show don't tell the most in workshops. The next one you're going to hear the most is you must murder your darlings, which, but the thing is to figure out what it means. So like what happens in a workshop, just for example, just talk about style. People will be reading and then you'll have everyone in a workshop say, I love this sentence. That's wrong. You do not want people to love your sentences. You want people to not notice your sentences. That is good. When they go, oh my goodness, you are a great writer. And it's very hard for us. For us as writers, I mean, I suffer from low self-esteem like everybody. I want to get praise from my peers. I want people to say, you're such a good, I mean, I was dying for that, you know? No, you can't go there. So that's what that phrase tends to mean. The reason you have to murder darlings is because they drew the attention leader. Yeah, that's why. But that's not to say that there isn't a whole cult following of people like, oh my goodness, what a great writer they are. To me, so we have to make our decisions. We make our decisions. I, for myself, have determined that that's bad writing, right? I don't want to go that direction. There are people who are applauded and lauded for incredible sentences. I just have to let that go for myself because it doesn't help me. It's not the path I want to go on. There are other people who style, let's say Gabriel Garcia Marquez, you know, with 100 Years of Solitude, not him being a writer. That's him using language to create a world. That's different. And of course, I didn't even read it in Spanish, so. Okay, thank you, Abhinav. Great work.
Thank you, Otis. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, we spent a good amount of time. Good, I'm glad. And Aditi, let's look at your work. I think I'll have to share to change that. There, Aditi, there was a book, I think it's Lanark. He was a Scottish writer, and it is just a wild book. I read it when I was in I read it there, and it had been suggested to me, and I couldn't say at the end of the day that I understood what the heck was going on. It was wild. It was a great invention, but with some connections to the real world. Anyway, I wanted to Lanark. It's kind of a strange name, but I wanted to suggest it to you because you're reminded in some ways, and also I think offered some of the difficulties when we're dealing with it. It seems so ethereal. So how do we connect it to the reality of human beings who end up being our readers? How can they understand it? You know, I think that that's the issue. Let's some beautiful writing here. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the piece and also read the first page.
Sure. So this is it's a first draft of a novel, and the novel is Indra, who is the king of the gods, and he's become a little bit obsolete and forgotten by the mortals, and so he's thinking about retiring, and that usually means he would find someone else to be the next Indra. And then what will happen in the next scene is he can't find anyone good enough. And then the inciting incident becomes he goes to his younger brother, Vishnu, who is now the predominant deity. And he says, I just want to eliminate the role of Indra from the pantheon. And they make a bet. And Vishnu says, why don't you go back to Earth one last time? If you can live a life and no one worships you, then you can exit. So then he gets reborn, and he thinks that'll be really easy, and he just has to not be a hero. But the world is in a lot of trouble, and so that's his struggle. That's kind of the premise.
Oh, and is this coming from a traditional story? Does this story already exist in a sense?
Well, Indra exists, and the pantheon exists, but not the story, because that's the
And
that's,
not this wager of returning
yeah, no, that's all
to.
all fiction. That's all in my head.
I think it's brilliant. Okay, so great. That's this sounds good to me. So I think that well, before I talk, why don't you go ahead and read the first page, if you could.
Sure. For the first time in the millions of years he could remember, Indra could not focus on the dance of the Apsaras. They undulated like white water hyacinths against the golden pillars of his palace. Yet his eyes strayed, measuring the darkness beyond the assembly hall, the empty space where once the gods and sages had massed to await his audience. He drank deeply from the golden goblet of purple-hued soma. It was unusual, he supposed, for the king of gods to contemplate his own mortality. The drone of the stringed tanpura that set the beat for the dance faltered to a halt. Indra watched as the Gandharva musician gulped in fear. It made Indra smile, his lips twitching under a thick mustache. At least some knew enough to fear his anger, his displeasure at a subpar performance. He did not want to stand the Apsaras, his dearest companions. He slapped his thigh in applause, one hand still gripping the goblet of intoxicating soma. The fingers of his other hand clenched the muscles of his thigh, wrinkling the red silk of his dhoti. Va! His voice ricocheted across the golden pillars and echoed throughout the chamber. Kritachi, one of his favorite apsaras, was the only one who dared to approach him. Her walk was sinuous, something between the stalking of a cat and the slithering of a snake. Most males, thought Indra, got hung up on breasts or hips or long legs. The true beauty of a woman, though, he knew, was in her movement, the grace of a flick of a wrist, the way Kritachi's beringed hand goes on.
Oh, I'm sorry that we're losing the last. Sorry, dropped. Yeah, go ahead to finish the sentence, please.
Dropped from her swan-like neck to her hip, wrapped in silver raiment.
Wonderful, beautiful writing. Here, so a little bit different. So we don't have a voice that's separated. We have a voice that's framing Indra in this. So just to point that out. And even though the language is definitely beautiful, it doesn't really draw attention to itself. It becomes sort of the consciousness of Indra and that point of view, it seems to me. So I think your what would you say? It's a conceit, I guess you call it. Your conceit for the novel, it sounds really interesting. I like that. I like the wager. I have the question: is it going to be modern? Is entering into the modern world?
Yes. Yeah.
That's going to be interesting. Now the question is: can Indra, have any person as an avatar, or does it have locked into? Like, I think of Indra perhaps as sort of a masculine, we have the mustache, we have a certain amount of physical prowess. I mean, I guess I'm hinting at it might be interesting if that was not the case.
Yeah, so when he's reborn, he has his memory of himself as Indra, but not his powers. And he actually gets born into like a very poor society where he has none of that strength to rely on.
I'm guessing a little bit, and he'll be a he.
He will be, yes.
Okay, because I can see, there's just, you create more difficulty, right, for his experience, the God's experience. to go into a society that doesn't already sort of honor through, patriarchy and, else, the sort of the male figure, and you also turn that on its head a little bit. But I like the idea a lot. I'm really interested in how you're going to depict this modern world and the circumstances that Indra will then go through. I think some questions, you'll want to try and answer. This already, but to answer some questions about to what degree does the person who is the avatar, right? Do they recognize themselves or do they not recognize themselves? It does seem to me that the more or less you do that, the greater possibility you have for reader identification, right? So if there's someone who knows themselves as this, sort of all-powerful being, that doesn't really go with our experience, but the human experience actualizing oneself, right? And finding in a sense, I don't know if you would describe it as one's power, but that, again, that sense of actualization, sense of connectedness, whatever it ends up meaning, is something that we all sort of on some level aspire to, whether we're doing it consciously or not. And I think it could be a very strong point of identification. And then it's a little bit difficult. So it becomes complicated because once you have the completed book, obviously come into it sort of understanding what the premise was to some degree, probably. They understand it. We're going to move from this sort of ethereal realm into a concrete realm. The concrete realm is really what the reader needs. I mean, Abhinav, we were talking about, like, once it gets to specificity, we like specificity. We have a lot of trouble with abstraction. We have a lot of trouble when we can't really understand something in tangible ways. And with reality, I guess, that's just really difficult for us. And so we feel that disconnection from those things. It's sort of like, I feel like I really embedded this, for myself when I thought about some texts like the Iliad. So like the Iliad, they have these Homeric epithets, right? Brave Achilles. So if we just think of that, brave Achilles, it can kind of tell us that there was just the oral poets telling these stories. We cannot understand the abstraction bravery without the concrete character and their act of Achilles. Does that mean, it's like we understand what bravery is because we imagine Achilles. And so then to be like Achilles is to be brave. I mean, I could question that. I mean, he just Hector around and slaughters him, but be that as it may, this is what we do. Or wily Odysseus. We don't understand what it is to be wily unless we understand Odysseus. So our brain have trouble with abstractions. So trying to figure out how to make it not abstract is important. And you have some things, probably the most, the women in this beginning, they're sort of, you can't get a complete hand. There again, they'll sort of remain ethereal. We have the crocodile, but it's a little bit, fantastical. There's things about the physical reality that we don't understand. If, the Christian version would be like, okay, so there's God, I mean, is it really like a white guy, a bearded white guy sitting on a throne? And what's the throne made out of? And what's it sitting on? Is it floating? Where's it floating? It's like all those questions that actual physical reality will lead us to wonder about. And when we don't have answers to that, then we have this sort of this. So I think, you know, here would probably, I mean, I would probably, at whatever degree you can understand and conceptualize this world. And I think that that's what Lanark kind of does, conceptualizes this alternate universe in a sense. And it might be up to you to understand that a little bit more. You know, I think of some of these movies that I've seen, you know, where they have the Pantheon, and it's like, I don't know, really? They're all in these chairs. You know, I don't, you know, I just have trouble with that. But I think it's a really, really interesting project. And I'm fascinated to see how you bring this character, where you put them, what circumstance you have them involved in, what their strategy is for, you know, I mean, it occurs to the person who does involve themselves in something also might do it, right? The person who remains aloof from all that's also predictable and unusual.
Right.
There's, I think, getting a great problem for your character, and I really look forward to reading it.
Would it be better to start in the concrete world and then come back to this? Like, would him actually now in the world, and then I guess this then becomes kind of like backstory, but
I think that's a fascinating possibility. I mean, you could work a couple different ways. In some, you don't have to decide about those things necessarily. So it could be some, your character, if your character really does not have an awareness background, you know, then they could kind of rise understanding it. And then that would give you opportunities for like having, you know, a sense of memory, or things get triggered, or whatever. That could be an interesting element to the story. You also end up starting with a character who the reader might identify with more easily. Because right now we have to basically suspend our identification, because it seems to me human beings cannot really identify with gods, because gods don't have the struggles that human beings have. We have the struggle of reality, we have the struggle of physicality. Gods don't. And that is really our element of connection with all of our protagonistic characters, our common struggle. So yeah, that's a possibility. But if you're thinking about writing it, I wouldn't worry about it. Because who is it? William Burroughs in Lunch, which I could not read personally. I mean, he was said to have written a novel, then he cut it up into pieces, threw it on the floor, gathered it together, and gave it to a publisher. So we can do a lot of different things with our work once we've written it. But on some level, there's always going to be, there's always a chronology. Then we can decide whether we want that chronology to move, and then here it becomes a backstory or whatever. Those are issues for later. Yeah, it seems great. I know you're working on a lot of stuff, so you have to have priorities. We
this
only
is
have
like a
so
good
much
break
time.
from the other project.
Well, great. I will give you my advice. You know, we can have a lot of projects. I mean, that's the thing. Once excited about the writing, I mean, truthfully, everything is a project, and you see stories every, and the act of creating is its own joy. So I hear you. Okay, any questions going forward?
No questions, folks?
Any questions about anything?
In which case, before we close, next Sunday, we will start half an hour earlier. I will update the Zoom webinar series so that it starts at 7:30 a.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. India time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that sounds good. And since it's just us right now, I know Jay, I'm not heard. I'm going to put a couple people. I'm sure Jay would submit something for next week. I read work yesterday and it was incredible. So I would definitely hope to find something from you next week we could look at.
I will send you something.
Ashwani.
I will send you something.
I'm not really trying to pressure. I'm actually completely fine with people. Everyone does things when they're ready. Well,
No,
what
I
the heck?
want to send you the first paras of my novel. I would really like to
great.
hear your opinion on it.
Okay, I look forward to that. And I love obviously leaning on Ashwani, so that's without saying.
Okay. We should have a good number of pieces for next Sunday. And folks, we will be putting this up on YouTube like always in a couple of days. And we'll see you next Sunday.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Otis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.